On the rain-swept evening of March 1st, 1932, the wind howling through the Hopewell, New Jersey estate masked the sound of a shattering reality. Inside the nursery of the world's most famous aviator, Charles Lindbergh, a crib sat empty. The blankets remained undisturbed, still retaining the warmth of a 20-month-old child. A smear of yellow clay stained the floorboards beneath the window. Resting on the radiator was a plain white envelope. This was not merely a crime scene, it was the epicenter of an event that would immediately be branded the crime of the century. The silence in that room signaled the beginning of a desperate, unprecedented manhunt that would forever alter the trajectory of criminal investigation. Outside in the mud, investigators discovered the physical mechanics of the intrusion. A crude, homemade wooden ladder lay abandoned in the brush, its rungs snapped, bearing the weight of a hasty, panicked retreat. Nearby, two distinct sets of footprints and deep tire tracks scarred the soft earth. The local police, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the victim's identity, descended upon the estate. The initial response was chaotic, a frantic search that trampled the grounds and irrevocably compromised the immediate perimeter. The shock to the nation was absolute. If the child of Charles Lindbergh, an international hero and a symbol of American triumph, could be snatched from his bed, no family felt secure. The public demand for swift justice exerted an agonizing pressure on law enforcement agencies operating with what we now consider primitive techniques. The investigative apparatus of the era was ill-equipped for a multi-jurisdictional mystery of this scale. There was no centralized federal database, no DNA profiling, and no instantaneous communication network to coordinate the hunt for the missing toddler. The early hours of the investigation were plagued by a critical failure to maintain a strict chain of custody, the chronological documentation showing the seizure, custody, control, transfer, analysis, and disposition of physical evidence. Troopers handled the ransom note without gloves, reporters swarmed the estate, and the tire tracks were walked over before plaster casts could be poured. Despite these catastrophic procedural errors, the sheer volume of physical material left behind forced investigators to rely on emerging, unproven scientific methods. The ladder, the note, and the mud were all they had. The envelope left on the radiator contained the first of what would become a series of ransom demands. The text demanded $50,000 for the child's return. The handwriting was erratic, characterized by peculiar misspellings and transposed letters, such as writing the word signature with an extra letter N, suggesting a writer whose primary language was not English. At the bottom of the page sat a bizarre, hand-drawn insignia, two interlocking circles, colored red and blue, pierced by 3 square holes. This unique symbol served as the kidnapper's modus operandi, the characteristic method of operation used to authenticate future communications and prove they held the child. Handwriting experts were summoned to dissect the linguistics of the ransom notes. They meticulously cataloged the distinct formation of specific letters, noting the consistent capitalization of inappropriate nouns, the unusual slant of the script, and the hyphenation of words that did not require it. The analysts concluded the author was likely of German descent, possessing a limited formal education but a deliberate, calculating mind. This linguistic profile provided a crucial parameter for the manhunt, narrowing the theoretical suspect pool across the eastern seaboard. Yet, handwriting analysis alone, often subjective and hotly debated in legal circles, would not be enough to secure a conviction in a court of law. The state needed physical, undeniable proof. The ransom payment itself became the next critical vector of the investigation. In April 1932, a designated intermediary handed over the demanded $50,000 in a Bronx cemetery, hoping for the child's safe return. The authorities had meticulously recorded the serial numbers of every bill. Furthermore, the payment was made primarily in gold certificates, a specific type of currency that was soon to be recalled by the federal government. This strategic decision transformed the ransom money into a dormant tracking device, waiting for the suspect to spend it in the open market. The tragic discovery of the child's remains in the woods just miles from the estate shifted the case from a rescue mission to a homicide investigation. For over 2 years, the recorded serial numbers yielded nothing but dead ends. Then, in September 1934, a breakthrough materialized at a Manhattan gas station. A motorist paid for fuel with a $10 gold certificate. Suspicious of the rare currency, the attendant jotted the vehicle's license plate number onto the margin of the bill. Bank tellers later matched the serial number to the Lindbergh ransom list, and the license plate led authorities directly to a German immigrant named Bruno Hauptmann. The arrest of Bruno Hauptmann triggered a comprehensive search of his Bronx residence. Hidden within the walls of his garage, investigators unearthed over $14,000 of the marked ransom money. Hauptmann vehemently denied any involvement in the kidnapping, claiming the money belonged to a deceased business partner who had left it in his care. He possessed no prior criminal record in the United States, and his physical appearance did not perfectly align with the vague descriptions provided by witnesses who claimed to have seen the cemetery intermediary. The money was damning, but the prosecution needed an irrefutable link to the Hopewell estate. The mandate for an irrefutable link brought Arthur Koehler to the forefront of the investigation. Koehler was a wood technologist for the United States Forest Service, an expert in the cellular structure and mechanical processing of timber. Long before Hauptmann's arrest, Koehler had been examining the crude ladder abandoned at the crime scene. He had already determined the exact species of wood used, tracing the specific milling patterns of the pine back to a lumber yard in the Bronx, a yard just blocks from where Hauptmann would eventually be found. Koehler's methodology was an unprecedented feat of forensic reconstruction. He analyzed the tool marks left on the ladder's rungs with microscopic precision. Every hand plane leaves a unique signature, a microscopic barcode of ridges and grooves dictated by the microscopic nicks and imperfections in its sharpened steel blade. Koehler took the specific hand plane recovered from Hauptmann's garage, noted the precise pitch and angle of the blade, and ran it across a test piece of North Carolina pine. The resulting striations were a flawless, exact match to the tool marks found on the kidnapping ladder. He proved that the tool in the suspect's possession was the exact instrument used to shave the wood for the crime. The most devastating piece of evidence, however, was found in the very architecture of the suspect's home. Koehler ascended into the dusty attic of Hauptmann's Bronx apartment. He noticed a missing section of a floorboard, a gap that had been hastily concealed. Koehler laid rail 16, a specific upright segment of the kidnapping ladder, into the empty space. The nail holes aligned perfectly. The grain of the wood flowed seamlessly from the attic floorboard directly into the ladder rail. It was a physical, biological, and mechanical impossibility for this specific piece of wood to have originated from anywhere else on Earth. When the trial commenced in Flemington, New Jersey, the prosecution anchored their entire case on this pioneering forensic science. The state faced a monumental challenge. They had no eyewitnesses to the actual abduction, no confession, and the initial crime scene had been disastrously compromised. The legal strategy relied entirely on weaving a tight, inescapable web of circumstantial evidence. They had to convince a jury of laymen that microscopic wood grains and linguistic anomalies were as reliable as a smoking gun. Arthur Koehler's time on the witness stand was a masterclass in forensic communication. He did not merely lecture the jury, he brought the attic into the courtroom. Using enlarged photographs and physical demonstrations, he showed the jury the exact alignment of the tree rings. As testified by Koehler, the mathematical probability of two different pieces of wood sharing that exact sequence of grain patterns, nail holes, and tool marks was virtually zero. He transformed an abstract scientific concept into a tangible, undeniable reality. The defense vehemently objected to Koehler's testimony, arguing that wood forensics was not a recognized science and therefore entirely inadmissible. Defense attorneys attempted to dismiss Koehler as a mere lumberjack, hoping to undermine the scientific validity of his findings. This objection struck at the heart of legal precedent regarding expert testimony. The judge, however, ruled in favor of the prosecution, allowing the jury to consider the wood analysis. This landmark decision permanently altered the landscape of criminal trials, establishing that novel scientific techniques, when grounded in sound methodology, rigorous testing, and observable facts, could be presented as substantive evidence in capital cases. The prosecution systematically layered the evidence. The linguistic profile of the ransom notes matched Hauptmann's idiosyncratic writing style. The marked gold certificates were found buried in his garage, and the very wood used to construct the latter had been physically ripped from his own attic. The synthesis of this evidence created a narrative so structurally sound that the absence of an eyewitness became irrelevant. The physical world had recorded the crime, and the early forensic scientists had successfully translated its testimony. Despite the overwhelming forensic case, ambiguities lingered in the public consciousness. Hauptmann maintained his innocence until his final breath, refusing offers of life imprisonment in exchange for a confession. The defense tirelessly searched for exculpatory evidence, information that might excuse or justify the defendant's actions and prove his innocence, but they found little to counter the state's scientific claims. Some investigators and journalists theorized that the kidnapping was too complex for one man to execute alone, suggesting the existence of unknown accomplices who escaped justice. These theories, however, could not dismantle the physical reality of the evidence presented in court. The jury deliberated, weighing the primitive yet precise scientific findings against the defendant's denials. Bruno Hauptmann was found guilty of murder in the first degree. The conviction carried the ultimate penalty. On April 3, 1936, the sentence was carried out in the electric chair at Trenton State Prison, bringing a grim finality to the judicial proceedings, even as debates over the case continued to echo. The reverberations of the Lindbergh tragedy extended far beyond the execution chamber, fundamentally reshaping American law enforcement. In direct response to the jurisdictional chaos that plagued the initial hunt, Congress passed the Federal Kidnapping Act. This sweeping legislation made it a federal crime to transport a kidnapped victim across state lines, granting the FBI immediate jurisdiction and access to national resources. The tragedy forced the modernization of the American justice system, demanding a unified, scientifically equipped response to complex crimes. Looking back, the investigation stands as a monumental turning point in the annals of justice. The detectives and scientists of the 1930s operated without the sophisticated digital and biological tools of the modern era. Yet their meticulous attention to the physical world, their willingness to trust the microscopic grooves of a hand plane and the cellular structure of a pine board, laid the foundational principles of modern crime scene analysis. They proved that the environment absorbs the actions of the criminal, waiting only for the right expert to decipher the impact. The resolution of this historical, high-profile case solved the immediate mystery, but its true legacy lies in the elevation of evidence over assumption. The conviction of Bruno Hauptmann was not secured by a confession or an eyewitness, but by the undeniable silent testimony of wood, paper, and currency. It was a triumph of observation, a testament to the fact that even with pioneering yet primitive techniques, the meticulous forensic reconstruction of a crime scene can expose the truth, no matter how deeply it is buried.